Good morning, everyone. So my name is Francis. I'm a .NET developer, so Microsoft stack. My focus is mainly on backend and cloud stuff, but today I will try to give you some insight into more front-end related stuff like the JavaScript and HTML, CSS stuff. First, I would like to give an introduction to the topic, which is separation of concerns. And what this actually means, it's a very important concept that will be important in the future for everything you do while coding. And it is actually splitting up your software into parts that are responsible for a specific thing. So you don't want to just scramble all your code and put it in all big one. That's of course very logical, but it's a very interesting thing to always keep in mind before you start coding how you want to structure your code. The reason why you would want to do this is, of course, to make it easier for other people to understand the codes. Because if you use a structure that is more well known to other people, then they can just jump into the code and start helping you. But it's also easier to refactor stuff. So when you have finished a feature, for example, you can more easily add stuff to it, since it will be more clear. And you will also avoid regression bugs. So a regression bug is something that's when you add a new feature and you have to touch some old code, because it's all put together, then you can create bugs in that part of the old code. But you can avoid that if you have very clear separations of your parts of the code. So you can also put a feature beside it instead of having to go into the old code and digging stuff and changing stuff that was already written before. Let's see, in this case, today we will be looking at the JavaScript mostly. It's important to have a distinction of really the UI, the user interface, which will be built up with HTML and CSS, and more the logical part, which is the JavaScript. Today we will have today's focus will be on manipulating the DOM using JavaScript. And the DOM is the document object model, which is actually a representation of your page in a way to interact, it's an interface to where you can interact with the existing page. So let's say you have a button and you want to do something with that button, you will have to interact with the DOM and tell the DOM like, okay, now if the button is clicked, something needs to happen. The definition of the DOM is the document object model is a programming interface for web documents. So as I said, an interface is a way to communicate with something. So interface is the browser has a lot of functions and there's a lot of JavaScript in the background that exists on the DOM, and then you can say to the DOM like, okay, now you need to execute this function, and you have an interface, you have a list of methods that you can execute to change the way your page looks or to have user interactivity. So it will be based on the HTML and CSS you write, and you will be able to change the page. And we will also be continuing looking at the event listeners. Yes, I will share my screen for a minute. Okay, now you should be able to see my screen. Yeah, I just used a very handy site, of course, as all developers. Google is our best friend, so of course you can always count on W3S school, 3 schools for some great examples. So how we want to add user interactivity is mostly by having event listeners. And I've heard that from past lectures, you have already learned to work with an on-click event, I think. But there's a different way of approaching the same thing. You can also add an event listener of the event type click, and then pass a function which will then be executed. And the difference with the on-click event is that you can have multiple listeners on the same event. So if you have an on-click event, you will, if you set the on-click event to a certain function, and you then override it, then it will always override. But if you use an event listener, you could possibly have the same click event do multiple things. You can also have different event triggers. So just to make it more visual, as you can see here, we have an event listener for the mouse over event. So that's when you move the mouse on the button, you can see there will be the my function will be triggered, and this just prints a new line mouse over. And mouse out is then when you leave the HTML element, and it will also print something. And then of course there's the click events, which you already know, but then in the way to do it with the event listener, and then you can see it will execute my second function here. So that's a very handy way to get some actual user interaction. I thought it would also be interesting to give you the list of things you can do. There's a lot of them, which you can just, if you just search for HTML DOM events, that's all the things you can do by adding an event listener, and you can then dynamically change your page. And yeah, I won't go over all them, that there's too many, but this is a handy list to be able to make your page really really actionable, really more user interactive. Okay. Let's see, there was something else interesting, I think. Maybe that's too, yeah, of course you can also remove an event handler, which means the events will no longer be triggered by the action. This can sometimes be when you switch to a context, a different way, a different context in your page. You don't want a certain event to be triggered anymore. That's also interesting to know. Yeah, this one is to okay, I think that's it for my short introduction. I think all the exercises or the stuff on GitHub will help you a lot.
HTML to define your project, DOM user interface, blah, blah, blah. Now you will learn how to use JavaScript to make your projects interactive. The first step is learning to work with DOM elements. With JavaScript, a good starting point is creating elements. You can't work on something that doesn't exist yet. So you've seen with what Francis introduced, all the different types that you could have a look over on WT3 schools. And this is just implementing that. So we have here a constant that is just, this doesn't matter what it's named. Here they call div L. We create it with document.createElement, and we call it div, and then we log it. So let's see what it means when we run it. I think I can just select this piece individually and run it. No. Can we just do the study, I think? Let me just check. Yeah, but I can't, I need to pull.
You should open the browser, I think. Yeah, using
Open
the
this
browser.
in the browser or what?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the fastest way because I'm not also not
this is
that
the first,
prepped.
I think.
Let me just do it here. All right, let me just take the first one where we have a div that we create. Can you, all right. All right, this is simple. It's just the div. This we have already seen, right? You've seen it into the how is it called? The yeah, the first lessons. Yeah. So yeah, this is nothing special, but you can also do it with JavaScript. So I want you to let me also, because I'm stop shy. Yeah, you can't see me, but I will not figure out how to do this now. But imagine you have a website, and for specific users, you want certain things hidden or seen. You can maybe do this. You can add a div with information in there with JavaScript, and then create an element depending on what user is logged in. A simple example. There are a lot of different examples, but this makes that you can behave with functions with dependencies for your HTML actually. So, for example, like I said, a simple div you can create like this has nothing in it, but you can also add things to this div and then make it part of your website and make it behave different ways with JavaScript, which is not really that possible with HTML. HTML is more something static. JavaScript makes it so that you can add logic and intelligence to it. Let's go to the next one. I'll just go one by one. What do we think will happen here, guys? Someone help me. The second line.
We will create a paragraph.
It will just do this essentially, right?
Yeah.
Up. Yeah. This will be it. What do we think here?
Button.
The same for button.
An element of a list, and then section, and then input.
Yeah, I won't write it next to it all the time because I'm slow. But let's just run everything. We've seen these are just different HTML elements essentially. So let me just run it. Yeah, so here it is. Input doesn't have a closing tag, whatever. All the other, and LE, do you remember what that is, list item? Like the small dot next to an item, a section, button, an input, yeah. Don't have to to explain much there, but yeah. So there's a different way to writing those than just writing the HTML itself. You can also create those things inside of JavaScript. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this exercise. Not that complicated.
Thanks, Yasin. Yeah, I think that's a pretty basic one. If you want to, you can take over again, Ilila.
Yes, thank you. I will stop recording now.
Welcome back, everyone. I will give a short explanation about function roles, and I will just use the GitHub page of the README to go through the different roles a function can have. So you've already learned about functions, of course. This is a way to define a function with a lambda expression, but of course there's also the basic way of defining function. Just maybe this looks more familiar. So this is a function. Now, what roles can a function have inside your applications? Let's go back. So the different roles, the function, how they function inside your application. We've just looked at one of them, which is the listeners, which means a listener is something that will plug into your DOM and listen to input from the user mostly, and then based on the input, there will be a result which will be handled by a different function, which is called a handler. And in this handler, there you can put something like the user, we were listening for a user that clicks on a button, and in the handler you can then say, okay, we want to change something in our page, or we want to go to the data and get some new data and show it on the page, for example. So this we have just looked at before. Now the utils is also actually the most basic type of function, which is something you just write yourself. Let's go to that point. It's too far. So yeah, as it is said here, they are pure functions. And I think this is interesting. You must define a utility function. These are the checklists that defines it. So it can take data as arguments. It must return new JS data. It can have unit tests. So it's a function you write yourself just to have extra logic in your software. And another interesting part about it is if you execute the function again with the same parameters, it will always return the same value. So it's immutable. It will always return the same results with the same parameters. Okay. A component. A component is more something that is a complete part of your application. A component you can maybe even look at it as a sort sub page in your page, where you want to make a page that if you make a component, you have to make sure it has a certain purpose, and it will also be a part of the user interface. So a component is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in one, and it will serve a certain purpose. So you can make this is actually for reusability. If you have a component, you should make components if you use a certain part of your application multiple times. So an example is you have, for example, in a lot of pages, you have a header, like in GitHub probably, yes. This part where you have the logo, you have some interesting links here, search bar, okay. We could say, okay, we use this on every page we go to. If I navigate to a different page, it's also there. So inside your application, it would be interesting. You don't want to rewrite it for every page you have, so you will make a component. This is the component then contains both the HTML, the styling CSS, and also the logic. So when you click a link, it has to do something that will be in a function then. Okay, that's too far. And the last one is a custom event. So the custom events are actually, sorry, not really a separate role as it says here, but it's more to have communication between between parts of the user interface. Yeah, so it's more the if you use components, it's interesting to have custom events, and yeah, I think you can listen about. This just mean you can make your own events. You have the on-click events, but you can also make your own custom events if you want different behavior. Okay. Yeah, I would highly suggest you look at this page for the details. Maybe a lot of you have already looked at it. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, Francis. Any questions? No questions? Okay, I'll pause.